9 hours strapped to an operating table, and I came back to consciousness, facing 68 missed calls. My throat felt scraped raw from the breathing tube. My back sat locked in a brace I couldn't yet feel. The phone on the tray table blazed like a fire alarm, and when I pulled it toward myself, there waited a voicemail from my father. I hit play with a hand that barely obeyed me. "Honey, don't be upset. We sold your condo to pay for your sister's wedding. You were out cold, so we signed the papers for you. $425,000. It's handled. Handled. My home gone while a machine breathed for me. The wedding sat 3 weeks away. I could barely lift my arm, but I made one phone call. And what happened next was nothing any of them had planned for. Welcome back to Family Reckoning, where families show you exactly who they are the moment they think you can't fight back, and where the quiet ones finish what the loud ones start. If you've ever been told that your sacrifice was simply expected, that you were the strong one so you'd understand, this story is going to sit close to the bone. Be sure to subscribe. A nurse named Anjali came in to check my vitals and told me the surgery had gone well. 9 hours, 3 levels fused, a long old injury finally rebuilt. I'd been the one holding the clipboard 1,000 times. Now, I was the body on the bed, and I hated how that felt. I asked her to play the voicemail again because I thought maybe the anesthesia was bending the words. It wasn't. My father's voice was calm, almost cheerful, the way he sounds when he's already decided you'll forgive him. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling tiles and did the only thing that has ever kept me steady. I started taking notes in my head. Sold. Signed. Out cold. 3 facts stacked like a triage board. I am a surgical nurse, which means I do not panic in the first 10 seconds. I assess. So, I assessed. Somebody had put my name on a document while I was unconscious in this building. That was not a misunderstanding. That was a signature that should not exist. "Anjali," I said, and my voice came out like gravel. "I'm going to need a copy of my anesthesia record. Times and all." She blinked, then nodded slowly, the way you do for a patient who might be confused. I wasn't confused. I was already building the case, even before I knew there was one, because whoever signed my name did it while I had a tube down my throat and a surgeon's hands inside my spine. People think the strong one bends. They forget the strong one keeps records. You have to understand what that condo was, and it wasn't square footage. I bought it at 28, 2 years after I came home from my second deployment as an Army medic. The bank almost laughed me out of the office. A single woman, a government nurse's salary, a back that ached on cold mornings. But I had saved like it was a mission, and I put down every dollar I had, and they handed me a key to a 3rd-floor unit with a view of nothing but a parking lot and a strip of sky. I cried in the empty living room that first night, sitting on the floor because I didn't own a chair yet. 6 years I paid that mortgage down. 6 years of double shifts and packed lunches and saying no to vacations my friends took without me. By the time I went in for surgery, I had close to $300,000 of equity in those walls. That number wasn't greed. It was every early morning I traded for a place that was finally fully mine. It was the first door in my life that no one could tell me to walk out of. My family knew exactly what it meant to me. That's the part that still catches in my chest. 4 months earlier, my dad had asked me, half joking, whether I'd ever borrow against the condo to help out with Emily's big day. I'd said no without blinking. I thought saying no was the end of it. I have learned since then that for some people, no is just the opening offer. Here's what people get wrong about me. They assume I didn't see it coming because I trusted my family. I saw plenty. After that half-joking conversation in the spring, I did 3 things, because that is who I am. First, I told my dad plainly that the condo was not part of anyone's budget but mine, and I watched his jaw tighten. Second, I called my bank and asked them to flag my accounts for any unusual activity because something in his face had stayed with me. Third, and this is the part that matters, I dug up an old power of attorney. Years ago, before a deployment, I'd signed an emergency POA naming my dad in case I was hurt overseas and someone had to handle a bill or a lease. I had never canceled it, so 2 days before my surgery, sitting in the pre-op paperwork blur, I signed a revocation. I revoked that power of attorney in writing. I handed my father a paper copy across his own kitchen table and said, "Just cleaning up old documents before I go under." He took it, he nodded, he set it by the fruit bowl. I felt good about it. I felt covered. That is the cruelest part of this whole thing, the small, clean feeling of having protected yourself. Because somehow, while I was unconscious, my signature still ended up on a deed. The authority I had killed had apparently risen from the dead. I lay in that hospital bed and turned it over and over. I had revoked the power. So, how exactly had they used it? They discharged me 4 days later. My surgeon was pleased. Honestly, the fusion looked solid on the films. My pain was controlled on oral meds, and I was already shuffling the hallway with a walker, which is the box you have to check before they'll let you go. Once you can do that, insurance wants the bed back. The problem hit me in the wheelchair. On the way to the curb, I had nowhere to go. My condo, the place I'd planned to recover in, with the bed I'd set up just right, and the bathroom rails I'd installed myself, technically belonged to someone else now. I couldn't drive. I was on muscle relaxers and a back brace that ran from my hips to my shoulder blades, and I wasn't allowed to twist or bend or lift more than a gallon of milk. So I called Renee. Renee Foster has been my friend since nursing orientation 12 years ago, the kind of friend who shows up with a cooler and a folding cot and no questions. She drove me to a short-term rental 2 miles from the hospital, a beige little furnished place that smelled like other people's vacations. She helped me into bed and put my pills in a row and made me eat soup. And while she fussed, I pulled out a fresh notebook, because the Army taught me that when everything is chaos, you make a list and you work the list. Page 1, I wrote down dates: surgery date, the day the voicemail came, the day they claim I signed. I left a wide margin for the times I didn't have yet. Renee watched me write with my left hand because my right shoulder still wouldn't cooperate. "Claire," she said gently, "who are you going to call first? Your mom?" I shook my head. The first call I needed to make was not to anyone in my family, and that surprised even her. The one phone call was to a real estate attorney, not my father, not my mother, who had texted 9 times in escalating exclamation points. A lawyer named Walter Higgins, recommended years ago by a coworker who'd survived a nasty divorce. I called him the next morning, propped up on 3 pillows, and I described what had happened in the flat voice I use for handoff reports. Patient, stable, home sold, signature forged or misused, unclear which. Higgins listened without interrupting, which I appreciated, and then he asked 3 questions in a row. "Was there ever a power of attorney naming your father?" "Yes," I said, "an old one." "Did you revoke it?" "Yes, 2 days before surgery, in writing." "And who is the buyer? Whose name is on the new deed?" I didn't know yet. There was a long pause, and then he said something that I wrote down word for word in my notebook. "Claire, if that deed was signed under an authority you'd already revoked, It may not be worth the paper it's printed on, but you're going to have to prove it, step by step. Nobody hands that to you. Nobody hands that to you. I almost laughed. Nobody had ever handed me anything. Get me the closing documents, he said. All of them. The deed, the settlement statement, the notary block, everything that was filed. Don't talk to your family about specifics. Just listen and write down what they say. I hung up and underlined one question in my notebook, so hard the pen tore the page. Who is the buyer? Because somebody had paid for my home, and I intended to find out exactly who and exactly what they knew. My parents showed up that afternoon because of course they did. My mother, Diane, came through the door first with a grocery store bouquet and a casserole. Like flowers and noodles, could paper over a deed. My father, Frank, hung back, hands in his pockets, doing his wounded but reasonable face. Sweetheart, my mother said, we have been worried sick. I let that sit for a second. You called 73 times after the surgery, I said. Not before. She set the flowers down and started talking fast, the way she does when she's rehearsed it in the car. They'd had no choice. The wedding vendors needed deposits. The market was perfect. They'd take care of everything. I shouldn't stress in my condition. And then she said it, the line I would hear in my sleep for weeks. Honey, it's just a condo. Your sister only gets married once. Just a condo. I looked at this woman who had helped me move a couch up 3 flights of stairs into that place, and now called it just a condo. My father finally spoke. You were always the strong one, Claire. We knew you'd understand. Emily needed this. You don't. I didn't raise my voice. I have learned that the calmest voice in the room is the one people remember. Who notarized my signature? I asked. The casserole's steam curled between us. My mother glanced at my father. My father looked at the carpet. It was all handled properly, he said, which is what people say when nothing was. And then he made his first mistake. Dennis took care of the paperwork end of it. Dennis. I wrote that name in my notebook the second they left, and I drew a box around it. Before they left, my mother delivered the part that was meant to trap me, dressed up as concern. The money was already moving. Deposits down on the venue. The dress paid in full. A honeymoon block booked in Cabo San Lucas. If you do anything rash, she said, smoothing my blanket like I was 8 years old, you'll ruin your sister's wedding. 3 weeks, Claire. 3 weeks, and it's done, and we can all move on. There it was, the deadline as a weapon. They thought the clock was on their side, that I'd never blow up a wedding that was already in motion, that I'd swallow $300,000 to keep the peace. And for one tired, drugged, aching minute, I almost saw their math. Then the medic in me took over, because a deadline is not an emotion. A deadline is just a number on a timeline, and timelines are the thing I am best at reading. 3 weeks was not their advantage. 3 weeks was my window. After they left, I lay there and stared at the box I'd drawn around the name Dennis, and I started to plan. But there was a problem, and it landed on me like a dropped weight. To prove the deed was void, I'd need my copy of the revocation, the paper my father had set by the fruit bowl, and my copies of everything important, the originals, the deployment binder where I kept that POA, were in a file box in the closet, in the condo, the home I no longer had the keys to. I closed my eyes. I'd protected myself with a piece of paper, and they'd locked that paper inside the very thing they stole. If you've ever been the strong one everyone leans on until the day you can't stand up, you already know how this feels. Stay with me. The part where I found out the exact minute they put my name on that deed is coming, and it changes everything. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens at that rehearsal dinner. Higgins worked faster than I expected. Within 2 days, he'd pulled the recorded documents from the county and the file from the title company. He emailed me a scan, and Renee held my laptop steady because sitting up still made my back scream. There it was, the deed that had erased 6 years of my life. The buyer's name was printed in plain black letters, Dennis Cabot. I knew that name. Dennis was my father's business partner, the man he'd built half-finished strip malls with for 2 decades, the man who came to our Thanksgivings and complained about contractors. The sale was all cash, and the price stopped me cold. $300,000, not $425, not market. They had sold my home worth $425,000 for $300,000 in cash to my father's own partner, even foggy on painkillers. I knew what that was. That wasn't a sale. That was a fire sale to a friend, a number designed to move fast and quiet. And it meant my father had lied in that voicemail too. The $425,000 he'd announced, like he was doing me a favor, had never existed. He'd let my home go for $300, and whatever the difference was, it had vanished into whatever he owed Dennis. Higgins said it plainly on the phone. An all-cash deal well under market to a close associate of the person holding the power of attorney. That's not just a red flag, that's a parade of them. Then, he told me the title company that closed it. I recognized that name too. It was a small outfit my father had used for years, run by a man he golfed with. Every door in this thing led back to the same handful of men shaking hands in a parking lot. And the signature, Higgins added carefully. Claire, I've seen your real signature on the engagement letter. The one on this deed doesn't quite match. We'll want to look at that closely. That night I couldn't sleep, so I made Renee pull up every signature of mine she could find. My driver's license, the hospital admission forms I'd signed before surgery, an old birthday card I'd left in my bag. Then, we put them next to the signature on the deed, side by side on the screen. Mine has a hard downstroke on the M, a habit from signing charts fast. The one on the deed was rounder, more careful, like someone tracing what they thought my name looked like. It was close. It was not mine. A stranger could be fooled. I couldn't. But the thing that truly stopped my breath wasn't the shape of the letters. It was the notary block at the bottom. The notary had certified that Claire Whitfield personally appeared before her and signed this document. The stamp gave a date, and Higgins told me something I hadn't known. A notary keeps a journal, a logbook of every signing, and a careful one records the exact time each person appears. He'd already sent for it. When the journal entry came back, it carried a time, 1:52 in the afternoon. I read it 3 times. On the day of my surgery, at 1:52 in the afternoon, a notary swore that I stood in front of her, of sound mind, and signed away my home. I set the laptop down. I knew roughly where I had been at 1:47 that day. I had been somewhere very specific, with very specific people around me, none of whom were a notary. But roughly wouldn't hold up. I needed it nailed to the minute, in writing on letterhead. I needed to know exactly where my body was at 1:52 in the afternoon, and I knew precisely which department in that hospital could tell me. Emily called the next morning. My little sister, 27, the bride. Her voice already pitched somewhere between apology and accusation. Claire, why are you making this about you right now? She said. I let the silence stretch, because silence makes guilty people fill the air. She filled it. She knew Mom and Dad had figured out the money. She hadn't asked for details. She had a wedding to plan, a dress to fit, a future mother-in-law to impress, and she just assumed it was handled. There it was again, handled, the family verb for a thing they did to me. You assumed it was handled. I repeated. Emily, they sold my home. A pause. Then, soft and rehearsed in our mother's exact cadence, it's just a condo, Claire, my own sister. The same tired little phrase, passed down like a family recipe. I closed my eyes and felt something in me go very quiet and very clear. She wasn't the architect of this. She hadn't drawn up a deed or forged a name, but she had chosen, very deliberately, not to know, because knowing might have cost her the perfect day. Did you ever once ask whose money was paying for your venue? I said. No, she admitted. I didn't want to. And that was the whole thing, wasn't it? Nobody in my family had done this out of hatred. They'd done it out of a kind of comfortable not looking, a belief that Claire was a renewable resource, that I would regenerate whatever they took. I told Emily I loved her, and I hung up before she could hear my voice change. Then, I called the medical records department and requested my complete surgical file, every page, every timestamp. I wanted to look Dennis Cabot in the eye, so Renee drove me to his office, a low brick building off the highway, with his name on a sign. I went in slow, leaning on a cane, the brace stiff under my coat. Dennis stood up behind his desk and had the decency to look uncomfortable for about 2 seconds. Then he settled into the same reasonable man act my father wears. Claire, you look like you're healing up. You bought my condo, I said. I didn't sit, because sitting and standing both hurt, and standing read better. Your father had authority, Dennis said, spreading his hands. I bought, fair and square, cash, clean, recorded, nothing improper about it. You bought a $400,000 home for $300,000, I said, from a man whose daughter was unconscious in surgery. He didn't flinch, which told me a great deal. Your dad and I go back 30 years, he said. He owed me. This squares us. He said it like a man who'd practiced sounding clean. Owed me. This squares us. So, that was the engine of it. My home hadn't paid for a wedding so much as it had paid down my father's debt to his partner, with a flower arrangement on top for cover. Dennis leaned back, comfortable now, and delivered the line he'd clearly been saving. I'd let this go if I were you. Good luck proving anything from a hospital bed. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I smiled, the small, calm smile I give patients right before I tell them the part they won't like. I've worked from worse positions than this bed, I said. You'd be surprised what I can prove flat on my back. The medical records came back in a fat envelope, and I read them the way I'd read 100 charts, except this one was about me. The anesthesia record is a beautiful thing when you need an alibi. Anesthesiologists document everything, every 5 minutes, by law and by habit. Intubation at 11:08 in the morning, induction confirmed, then page after page of vitals, blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen, logged in tidy columns straight through the afternoon. At 1:55 in the afternoon, my chart noted a stable rhythm, mean arterial pressure holding, the surgeon mid-procedure on the second fusion level. At 1:55, the same. At 1:52 in the afternoon, the exact minute a notary swore, I stood before her and signed my name. I was face down on an operating table with a tube in my throat, a catheter in my arm, and another human being's hands inside my open back. I read it, and I went very still. This wasn't a he said, she said anymore. This was a timestamp against a timestamp, my signature certified at the precise minute a machine was breathing for me. There is no version of that story where it's true. I called Higgins and read him the Times, and for the first time I heard him get excited, in the careful way lawyers do. That's about as airtight as an alibi gets, he said. But then, he added the thing I already feared. It proves you didn't sign it. It strongly suggests forgery, but to make the whole deed collapse cleanly, to take the buyer's title down to nothing, your best weapon is still that revocation. The paper that proves the power they used was already dead. We need to find it. The revocation. The paper copy was locked in a file box in the condo I couldn't enter. I lay awake half the night, chewing on it, furious that the one document that mattered most was sitting in the closet of the home they'd stolen. And then, somewhere around 3 o'clock in the morning, I remembered something, and I sat up so fast my back punished me for it. I am a careful person, careful to the point that my friends tease me. When I'd signed that revocation 2 days before surgery, I hadn't only handed my father the paper copy, I'd scanned it. I'd photographed it on my phone and emailed it to my old JAG contact from my army days, a habit drilled into me overseas, where you back up every important document 3 ways because you might not come home to the original. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and searched my own sent folder, and there it was. An email sent 2 days before my surgery, 3 days before the closing. Attached, a clean scan of the signed, dated revocation of power of attorney. The metadata was right there. Sent date, time, 2 full days before they put my name on that deed. 2 days before they signed my name, I had already killed the power they used to do it. It had been sitting in my sent folder the entire time while I lay in a hospital bed, thinking the proof was locked away from me. I forwarded it to Higgins at 3 o'clock in the morning with one line. Found it. Look at the date. He called me back at 7 o'clock. Claire, he said, and I could hear him smiling. This changes the whole shape of the fight. With the revocation dated before the closing and your name signed while you were on a table, we have strong grounds to argue that deed never transferred a thing. We argue it's void, not just shaky. And that's a fight I like our odds in. Higgins laid it out like a surgeon describing a procedure, which is the only way I can absorb bad and good news at once. We would move on 3 fronts at the same time, he said. First, a quiet title action in civil court, asking a judge to declare the deed void because the power of attorney had been revoked before it was used, and because the signature itself was forged. A void deed conveys nothing. If a judge agreed, the condo had never legally left my name, no matter what was recorded. Second, a criminal referral, using a revoked power of attorney to transfer property and signing my name to a deed, wasn't a family squabble. It was potential forgery and fraud, and that was a matter for the police and the district attorney, not for me to litigate alone. Third, a claim to the title company and their underwriter, because their notary had certified a signature that the anesthesia record proved was impossible. Title insurance, precisely for forgery. Every one of these, Higgins said, you file, you sign, you decide. I draft, but the moves are yours. That mattered to me more than he knew. Nobody was rescuing me. I was picking up each tool and using it. Then he gave me the warning. Once we file the quiet title and record a notice of pending litigation against that property, it becomes public. Dennis can't resell or refinance, which is good, but your family will know within days. There's no quiet way to do a thing this loud. I looked at the calendar on the wall, 16 days to the wedding. Then let's make it loud, I said, but on my schedule, not theirs. I want to be honest about the part that was hard because it wasn't fear of looking ungrateful. I stopped caring about that label years ago. The hard part was that filing meant my father could face criminal charges. Real ones, the kind with a record. My mother must have smelled it coming because she called that evening crying before I even said hello. Claire, please, whatever you're planning, please don't. Do you want to send your father to prison over money? Over a building? She knew exactly which thread to pull. I sat with the phone against my ear and let myself feel it, all of it, the weight of being the one who could end this or escalate it. And then I thought about the math they kept doing. The math where my life's work was the variable they could always solve for. Mom, I said, I didn't do this. I didn't forge a name. I didn't sell a home that wasn't mine. He did that. You did that. I'm just refusing to pay for it with 6 years of my life. She said I was being cold. I told her I was being clear, and that those two things look the same to people who counted on you being warm enough to rob. I hung up gently. I wasn't cruel about it, but I made a decision in that moment that I held on to for the next 2 weeks. I would file. I would let the legal machinery move, but I would not detonate it in a phone call or a parking lot. I would choose the moment myself, the one room where the truth would land with the most witnesses and the least noise from me. There was only one room like that. We filed. Higgins walked me through each signature page over video, and I signed everyone with my real, hard downstroke, M, the genuine article, while my back ached and my resolve didn't. The quiet title complaint went to the civil court. A notice of pending litigation, a lis pendens, was recorded against the condo, which meant the property was now legally frozen. Dennis Cabot could not sell it, could not borrow against it, could not do anything but sit and watch his clean cash deal turn radioactive. The same week, Higgins delivered the package to a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit, a woman named Detective Alvarez, who called me to confirm the timeline herself. I read her the Anesthesia Times. I read her the revocation date. There was a silence on her end that I'd come to recognize, the silence of someone realizing a case had just gotten very easy to believe. The first wave hit fast. I heard later, through my mother's furious texts, that Dennis had called my father in a panic the moment the lis pendens showed up in a routine title check. The clean deal was supposed to disappear into the county records and never be seen again. Instead, it was now flagged, frozen, and under a detective's eye. My family knew I had moved. The flowers stopped coming. The casseroles stopped coming. The phone calls changed from sweetheart to how could you? And underneath all of it, I could feel the pressure building toward one fixed point on the calendar, the rehearsal dinner, a week and a half away, where 2 families would gather in one expensive room. They thought I'd stay home and lick my wounds. I had a brace, a cane, and a folder. And I had an invitation. People kept telling me it was just a condo. It was 6 years of my life and the first door that was ever fully mine. If a boundary you set was ever called selfish by the people who benefited from you having none, you understand this in your bones. Hit subscribe, because what happens at that rehearsal dinner is the part I most want you to see. My father came to the rental alone, and this time there were no flowers and no act. He looked older than I'd seen him, gray around the edges, his shirt wrinkled like he'd slept in his truck. He sat on the beige couch and put his face in his hands, and for a moment I saw the man who'd taught me to change a tire in the rain. The Lakeside project went under, he said, not looking up. I lost everything in it. I owed Dennis $140,000, and I couldn't pay. And the Ashfords, Brooks's in-laws, they've got money, real money, and I couldn't stand the thought of them seeing us throw some cheap little wedding like we were nothing. His voice cracked. I didn't know how else to not look like a failure. And I believed him. That was the worst part. I believed every word, and it didn't change a single thing. Because then he lifted his head and asked me the only thing he'd really come to ask: drop the lawsuit. Just until after the wedding. Let Emily have her day. and then we'll figure out the condo. I swear, even broken, even crying, he was still asking me to pay, not borrow, pay. I kept my voice level. You didn't borrow from me, Dad. You didn't even take from me. You erased me. You put a stranger's hand on my name and sold the one thing that proved I ever stood on my own. He stood up, and the softness curdled into the thing it always becomes when these men don't get their way. You're going to embarrass this whole family, he said at the door. You'll regret it. No, I said quietly. I really won't. After he left, I did what I always do when my hands are shaking. I organized. I sat at the little rental kitchen table and built a folder, the cleanest folder of my life, because I'd decided the rehearsal dinner was where this would end. And I wanted the truth to need no narration from me. One page, the revocation of power of attorney, signed and dated with the email timestamp printed beside it. One page, the deed with the forged signature paired with the notary's journal entry, logging the signing at 1:52 in the afternoon. One page, the anesthesia record, the column showing my vitals at 1:45, 1:47, 1:55, a machine breathing for me. One page, the recorded deed showing Dennis Cabot, all cash, $300,000 for a $425,000 home. And one page, a short letter from Higgins stating the obvious in lawyer language, that a deed executed under a revoked power of attorney, bearing a signature certified at a time the signer was provably under general anesthesia, was void. I made 3 copies. I rehearsed nothing because I didn't need a speech. The documents were the speech. Then I did the harder rehearsal. I stood up from the table slow, and I practiced standing, because at the rehearsal dinner, I intended to be on my feet for the part that mattered. Renee had brought me a cane that didn't look medical. Dark wood, almost elegant. I practiced walking the length of the rental and back, the brace holding my spine straight as a flagpole. My physical therapist would have been proud and horrified. Each lap, I thought the same thing. They expected a woman who couldn't stand. I was going to walk into that room on my own 2 feet. Emily called again 4 days before the wedding, and her voice was different. The rehearsed sweetness was gone. I heard there's police, she said. A detective came to Dad's office. Claire, what is actually happening? So I told her. Not the angry version, the true version, plain and short. The old power of attorney, the revocation I signed 2 days before surgery, the forged signature certified at 1:52 in the afternoon while I was on the table. Dennis, the partner, the debt, the cash deal under market. I laid it out like a chart, and then I stopped talking and let it sit. The silence on her end went on a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. They told me you'd agreed to help, she said. They told me you wanted to. And there it was, the lie they'd fed her to keep her hands clean and her conscience quiet. I never agreed to anything, Emily, I said. I was unconscious. I heard her breathe. The whole wedding, she said slowly, like she was seeing it for the first time. The venue, the dress, all of it. It's your house. It's my house, I said. She didn't promise me anything. She didn't apologize. Not really. Not yet. But something had shifted, and I could hear it. The sound of a person who'd built a perfect day, starting to notice the foundation was somebody else's stolen home. I have to go, she whispered, and hung up. I didn't know which way she'd fall. I'd stopped expecting my family to surprise me in good ways. But for the first time, one of them had asked the question that mattered. What actually happened? And she hadn't liked the answer any more than I did. The rehearsal dinner was at Fairview Country Club, the kind of place with valet parking and a fireplace big enough to stand in. The Ashfords were paying for the dinner itself, a fact my mother had mentioned roughly 40 times, because the Ashfords were the entire reason my home had been liquidated. Richard Ashford owned a chain of car dealerships. His wife wore real pearls. They were exactly the audience my parents had bankrupted me to impress. And that, I'd realized, was the precise reason the truth belonged in that room. My father's whole crime had been about appearances, about not looking like a failure in front of these people, so these people would be the ones to see clearly. I confirmed I'd attend. My mother actually sounded relieved on the phone, and I understood why. They thought my coming meant surrender. They thought I'd decided to swallow it, to sit quietly at the family table and play the gracious sister, to let the wedding proceed and sort the money out later, the way I always sorted things out, by absorbing them. "I'm so glad you're coming, sweetheart," my mother said. "It means everything that you'll be there as family." As family, I held that phrase after she hung up. They wanted me there as family, by which they meant as scenery, as proof to the Ashfords that the Suttons were warm and whole and generous. I would be there as family, just not the way they pictured it. I laid out my clothes the night before, a dark blue dress that hid the brace, flat shoes I could stand in. I put the 3 folders in a leather bag. They thought I was coming to surrender. I was coming to set the record straight in front of every person they'd hurt me to impress. My mother found me in the club lobby 20 minutes before dinner, and she'd clearly come to neutralize me first. She took my arm, gentle, conspiratorial, steering me toward a quiet corner by the coat check. "Now listen," she murmured, smiling for the room. "Whatever's going on with the lawyers, this is not the night. The Ashfords are here. Richard's whole family is here. If you make a scene, if you embarrass us in front of them, you will lose this family for good. Is a building worth that?" She squeezed my arm. "It's just a condo, Claire. Don't blow up your sister's day over it. Just a condo." The 3rd time, from her lips, maybe the 30th overall. The family hymn. I looked at my mother, at her careful church smile, at the pearls she'd borrowed to match the Ashfords, and I felt the last bit of hope I'd been carrying quietly set itself down. "It was never just a condo, Mom," I said. My voice was even, almost kind. "It was the one thing in this family that none of you built. That's why you could take it without flinching. You never put a single dollar into it, so it never felt real to you that it was mine." Her smile twitched. "You're being dramatic." "I'm being calm," I said. "You should be grateful for that." A dramatic person would have called the Ashfords last week. Her face went pale under the lobby lights. She opened her mouth and closed it. Across the room, a bell rang, calling everyone to the tables. "Let's go in," I said, taking my own arm back. "I'd hate to be late. I have a toast to give." I'd spoken to Higgins that afternoon, one last time from the back of Renee's car. He'd reminded me, in his careful way, that I didn't need to perform anything. The legal machine was already running, the quiet title was filed, the lis pendens recorded. Detective Alvarez had already requested an interview with both my father and Dennis for the following week. "You don't have to convince anyone tonight," Higgins said. "The facts will do their work in a courtroom, regardless." I knew that, but I also knew something he didn't, something only a daughter knows. My family didn't fear courtrooms. Courtrooms were abstract, months away, easy to spin to the neighbors as a misunderstanding. What they feared, what my father had bankrupted me to avoid, was being seen plainly by the people whose opinion they'd sold my home to buy. So this wasn't about winning the case. The case was already winnable. This was about making sure that when I won it, no one in that room could ever again pretend it hadn't happened, that they could tell the Ashfords some softer story I wanted witnesses. I wanted the truth said once in the open, by me, calmly, with paper to back it, so that it could never be folded back into the family myth. Detective Alvarez had confirmed the interviews. The documents were copied. My signature, the real one, was on every filing. As I walked into that dining room, on my own 2 feet, cane in one hand, leather bag in the other, I felt strangely steady, not vengeful, steady, like the moment before a long surgery when you've checked every instrument and you know the room is ready. The room was ready. I just had to wait for my father to hand me the opening, and I knew he would. The dining room glowed. 40 people at long tables, candlelight, the Ashfords holding court near the head, my parents performing warmth so hard you could see the strain. My father spotted me, and his face did something complicated, relief and dread at once. He came over and, to my disgust, took my elbow and steered me toward the Ashfords like a prize. "Richard, Margaret, this is my older daughter Claire," he announced, beaming. "She's our strong one, a surgical nurse, served 2 tours. So generous, this one. Always taking care of the whole family. So generous." I shook Margaret Ashford's cool hand and smiled, and said it was lovely to meet her, and I let my father stand there basking in the image of the giving daughter, because the higher he climbed on that lie, the farther it was going to fall. I took my seat. Emily caught my eye from across the room, and she didn't smile. She just held my gaze, with a question in her face, and I gave her the smallest nod. Salads came and went. Wine was poured, and then, right on schedule, my father stood and tapped his glass with a fork, and the room hushed, and he began the toast he'd been dying to give. "I just want to thank everyone," he said, voice thick with feeling, "for being here as our families come together. A wedding like this takes sacrifice, and I want to say how proud I am of the way this family pulls together when it counts. How everyone gave what they could to make Emily's day perfect." He raised his glass toward me, the generous daughter, inviting the room to admire his fiction. So I set down my napkin, and I stood up. "Since we're toasting sacrifice," I said, "let me say a few words about my sister." The room turned to me, warm, expectant. Emily went still. My father's glass hovered. I kept my voice gentle, almost soft, because I'd learned long ago that the calmest voice in the room is the one nobody can look away from. "Emily, I love you. I have since the day they brought you home, so I want everyone here, both families, to know exactly what paid for tonight." I reached into the leather bag. 3 weeks ago, I had spine surgery, 9 hours under general anesthesia. I lifted the first page. While I was unconscious, a deed was signed, selling my condominium, my home. $425,000, sold for $300,000 in cash to my father's business partner. A murmur moved through the tables. My mother's hand found her throat. "The deed bears my signature," I went on, setting the page down where Richard Ashford could see it. "Certified by a notary, whose own journal logged me standing in front of her and signing at 1:52 in the afternoon." I laid the anesthesia record beside it. "This is my surgical chart. At 1:47 that afternoon, a machine was breathing for me. There was a tube in my throat and a surgeon's hands in my back. So I'd like someone to explain whose hand signed my name." The silence was total. You could hear the candles. "2 days before that surgery," I said, placing the 3rd page down, "I had already revoked the power of attorney they used, in writing, time-stamped. A deed signed under a revoked power with a forged signature, certified at a time I was provably unconscious, is worth nothing. The sale was never legal." The condo was never theirs to sell. That's when my father exploded. He slammed his glass down so hard the wine jumped. "How dare you?" he roared, on his feet now, face purple. "How dare you do this here, in front of everyone? After everything this family has done for you, everything this family did for me," I repeated, and I did not raise my voice 1 inch. The contrast did the work. He was shaking. I was steady. "Dad, you sold the proof that I ever stood on my own. You didn't do something for me. You took the one thing I built without any of you. I'm just taking it back." My mother was crying, reaching for the Ashfords. It's a misunderstanding, please." But Margaret Ashford had already picked up the anesthesia record and was reading it, her pearls rising and falling, her face the careful blank of a woman recalculating an entire family. I let them have the silence for a moment, because some silences are evidence too. Then I gathered my pages, unhurried. "I didn't come here to ruin a wedding," I said to the room, and I meant it. I came so that no one could pretend this didn't happen. The police already have the file. There's a detective. My father and Mr. Cabot will be hearing from her this week. I placed one full copy of the folder on the table in front of my parents. Gently, the way you'd set down something fragile. "That's for you. So there's no confusion later about what was said tonight." My father sank back into his chair like the air had gone out of him. My mother sobbed into a napkin, while the Ashfords sat in stunned, upright horror, their borrowed warmth gone cold. And then Emily stood up. The whole room watched my little sister push back her chair in her engagement dress, her face wet, and walk the length of that long table, past our parents, to me. She didn't absolve them. She didn't say it was okay. She just stood beside me and said loud enough for the Ashfords to hear, "I didn't know it was this. I swear I didn't. I should have asked. I'm so sorry, Claire. It wasn't everything, but it was the first true thing anyone in my family had said in 3 weeks." I took her hand. Then I picked up my cane, and I turned to go, because I'd said what I came to say, and the rest belonged to the courts now. Every step toward the door hurt, the brace biting, my back screaming. I walked it anyway, slow and straight, on my own 2 feet, the way I'd practiced. The law moved the way Higgins said it would, only faster, because there's nothing like a forged signature certified against an anesthesia record to make a case simple. The legal fight wasn't quick, but it was lopsided. Faced with my surgical chart and the time-stamped revocation, Dennis Cabot's attorney did the math and told him to stop defending a deed he couldn't win on. It still took a court date, sworn declarations, and a stack of filings that ate most of the summer, but rather than gamble on a trial he was going to lose, Dennis agreed to a consent judgment, and the court entered the order we'd asked for. The deed was declared void. Title to the condo returned to my name, where legally it had never stopped being. The lis pendens had done its job, freezing the property so Dennis could never offload his problem onto some innocent third buyer. The title company's underwriter, staring down their own notary's certification of an impossible signature, settled with me quickly and quietly, covering my legal fees and then some. Because forgery is exactly the disaster, title insurance is built to eat, and the criminal side did not simply vanish the way my family had assumed it would. Detective Alvarez interviewed my father and Dennis that following week. I didn't attend, and I didn't gloat. I gave my statement, I handed over my documents, and I let the system carry the weight I'd spent 3 weeks lifting alone. Dennis Cabot, who had looked me in the eye and wished me luck proving anything from a hospital bed, found himself explaining to a financial crimes detective why he'd paid cash under market for a home whose owner was unconscious in surgery. My father found himself explaining why a power of attorney he'd been formally handed a revocation for had still been used to sign his daughter's name. Those conversations had consequences, the slow, grinding legal kind that don't make for a dramatic scene, but follow a person for a very long time. A few months later, I stood in the middle of my own living room again, empty because Dennis had cleared out the furniture he'd never had the right to touch, but mine. The afternoon light came through the window and fell across the floor where I'd cried on move-in night 6 years before. I stood there a long time with my cane and my healing back, and I let myself feel the one clean thing in all of it. This door was mine again. The wedding did not happen, at least not as planned. The Ashfords, it turned out, had less appetite for marrying into a family under criminal investigation than they'd had for the pearls and the country club. Emily postponed it. She and I are slow now, careful, rebuilding something smaller and more honest than what we had. She comes by sometimes. She helped me pick out a new couch, and she didn't once call the condo just a building. My parents and I speak rarely. I didn't cut them off with a grand declaration. I simply stopped being the account they could draw from. My mother still sends the occasional message about forgiveness, by which she means forgetting. I answer kindly and briefly, and I do not forget. My father's case is still moving through the system at its own gray pace. I went back to work as soon as my surgeon cleared me, back to the operating room, back to being the calm one holding the instruments. Except now, when a patient is wheeled in and the anesthesiologist starts the clock, I think about how carefully that record gets kept, every 5 minutes, by law. I think about how a thing built to save a life ended up saving mine in a way no one in that operating room could have guessed. Here's what I know now, and it took losing my home for 9 hours to learn it. Love that only ever flows one direction isn't love at all. It's an invoice, and I stopped paying it the day I learned that my name, even traced by someone else's hand, still belonged to me. That's how a quiet woman takes her life back. 9 hours under, 68 missed calls, 1 revoked signature they forgot I sent to myself. If this story reached something in you, tell me in the comments about the line you finally drew with someone who counted on you not drawing it. And subscribe to Family Reckoning, where the people everyone underestimates are the ones who get the last word.